Hi all, this is Fischer versus Spassky Game 8 of the 1972 World Championship match played in Reykjavik, Iceland. Fischer, playing white, repeated his use of c4, which is the English opening. It can be seen as a kind of reverse Sicilian defence. Spassky played the symmetrical variation, and we have here still symmetry at move 4. And both sides fianchetto their bishops. And now here, Fischer elects to play d4. If he had played a move like e4, he would be accepting a liability weakness here on d4. So he prefers to remove this central tension straight away, and he has a tiny edge out of the opening here. But it's worth noting at this point that this c4 could become a target on this semi-open c file, and I believe Spassky's strategy was to try and target this pawn, but he was a bit over enthusiastic later, as we'll see. Now here Fischer played queen f4, so it has an idea that the queen might be needed to retreat back to d2 later. So in a way it's far less committal than queen h4, but it also protects this bishop on g5, which could become attacked if black played queen a5. So it's a kind of dual purpose move, a bit less committal than playing queen h4. Also white might want to play bishop h6 at some point to try and exchange off this dark squared bishop. Spassky now played queen a5. So he is indirectly attacking that bishop on g5, and Fischer now played rook ac1, so he's indirectly supporting this potentially weak pawn, and maybe knight d5 is going to be useful in the future. Spassky now played rook ab8, which is a common idea of trying to gain some queenside counterplay with a6 and b5. Fischer reinforced his position a bit with b3, and now Spassky played rook fc8. I think at this stage it's roughly equal according to my analytical assistant. It does look equal. White hasn't really got that much out of the opening at this point, apart from a small bind on the d5 square. Fischer retreats his queen now to d2. It is comfortable to play for white, and Spassky tries to get some queenside counterplay now with a6. Now Fischer plays bishop e3, and this move should have in theory discouraged b5 because of the threat of bishop a7, where these bishops are zooming down the queenside, and it actually picks up the exchange now. And a lot of commentators have treated this b5 as a clear blunder. However, it's not quite clear that this was such a blunder. It lost the exchange. However, black does pick up a pawn for the exchange with pressure on the queenside, and white's queenside has been broken up here. So potentially, it could have, given black a much longer game than this actual game. But what happened here after rook fd1 was simply incredible. Perhaps this is one of the worst blunders of the match. Spassky may be under great psychological pressure at this point, but he retreated his knight on d7, and we see now that the black queen is en prise, and there's a common tactical theme here of playing knight d5, which a player of Spassky's class would really should never really allow. The queen has to do something, and then there's an intermediary knight takes pawn check, and this works out well in this position even with king f8, because remember this c4 bishop is also en prise, so white just took back on d2 and has just won a pawn, and now the advantage is clearly completely winning for white now in this position. It's just much better now. So Spassky played on though for a little bit. He played rook b1 check, now knight c5, but Fischer just uses some technique now to gain some space here with e4 and f4 being played, and now he aims potentially for e5 to be played. Now rook ec2. So black's just sitting and watching here. White could either bring the king towards the centre and maybe later play bishop h3, or maybe even is threatening e5 in some relations. Black plays bishop b2 and Fischer plays bishop e2, improving this piece like this, with the threat potentially of bishop g4 check. Spassky played h5 to stop that bishop g4. Now we see rook d2, and now bishop a3, trying to keep the position solid. But now Fischer crashes through with f5, damaging black's pawns over here. After g takes f5, e takes f5. Spassky played king e5 here. Let's have a quick look. If he had taken on f5, then my analytical assistant is crying out for rook takes c5 check, because after bishop takes c5 we have bishop d3 check, forking the king and rook. So that's why Spassky couldn't have done king takes f5. So he plays king e5. Now Fischer plays rook cd4 with quite a vicious threat of rook d5. Black's pawns are now a wreck, isolated pawns everywhere. Spassky now plays king takes f5 because it's safe to do so, relatively. But rook d5, king e6. Fischer wins that d6 pawn, and now plays rook c6. And Fischer has really just massively increased his advantage here. This pawn's dropping off, the position is generally fragile, and these pawns are all isolated. Spassky had enough and resigned now. Let's do a quick summary and conclusion from this game. Fischer didn't really get that much of an advantage out of the opening. He had a comfortable position, but he did have to retreat his queen to d2. Spassky should have been put off by this bishop e3 move to play b5, but he played it anyway, controversially losing the exchange. But the clear blunder was this knight fd7, just allowing knight d5, which is a very thematic tactical device, and it worked very well here, just gaining a pawn, damaging black's pawn structure. Later, Fischer was improving the position of his bishop. Black played h5, which let the black pawn structure further deteriorate with f5 check, and due to a tactic that couldn't have been taken back on f5. Now so Spassky had all these isolated pawns. Fischer won the d6 pawn, and the final position is just crushing for white. So the game had a couple of potential blunders, moves that can be labelled as blunders, but for me the worst blunder was knight fd7, not b5. If you have any comments about the game, please leave them on YouTube. Thanks very much, and I hope you enjoyed that.